Well, for more on today's report, the President of the Australian Human Rights Commission, Catherine Branson, joins me in the studio now. Catherine Branson, thanks very much for coming in and talking to Afternoon Live on what must be a pretty busy day for you, because I understand this is the final or close to the final day of your 5-year term as President of the Human Rights Commission.
That's right, Nick. My last day at the Commission formally is Sunday evening, but so today is the last working day.
OK, I might ask you to reflect on your time as Commission President in a moment, but first things first, tell me a little bit more about the report that you've spent the last 8 months preparing and what led you to form the conclusion that, quote, the Australian government failed to respect the rights of children.
Well, we were very concerned that there might be children being held in jails who were in fact children after being convicted of people smuggling offences. We visited Darwin and met some young people who'd been detained for a long period before being charged. But then this press report started to emerge that there were in fact children who'd been convicted. We looked into the science internationally and found that there were very serious questions about the means being used to assess age. And that means was by taking a wrist x-ray and analysing the skeletal maturity that was shown by that x-ray.
OK, typically, what were the circumstances of these children that were being detained here in Australia?
Well, they were young Indonesians who'd crewed boats bringing asylum seekers to Australia. Because they come nearly always from very remote parts of Indonesia, they come from poor, impoverished families, often left school very early so they can get paid employment to help support their families. They don't have birth certificates in the way that we do. A very high proportion of Indonesians in remote parts of the country don't have birth certificates. Some of them don't even know precisely how old they are. But Australia has a policy of not prosecuting children unless there are exceptional circumstances, and the mandatory terms of imprisonment that are provided by our law for people smuggling don't apply to children. So it's very important to get the age assessment right.
OK, you mentioned there that many of these children lack proper documentation showing their age, but investigations did reveal that it wasn't that hard to establish the true age of these individuals.
Well, there were some cases in which journalists travelled to Indonesia, there were some cases in which lawyers travelled to Indonesia and did find evidence that was quite compelling about age. But the use of wrist x-rays, which was what the Australian authorities were principally relying on, we now know is just not a means that can help you find out whether someone's over or under the age of 18 years.
Certainly that practice of x-raying the wrists of detainees has been particularly contentious, and the federal government has already moved to stop using it as a means of determining age. Has the government's response been the appropriate one?
Well, I think it's excellent that the government has ceased using wrist x-rays. We have asked that they be removed from being a procedure that the law provides for age assessment. They shouldn't be, because they're not useful at this age threshold of whether you're an adult or not an adult. The government has also recently reviewed the cases of 25 young individuals identified either by the Australian Human Rights Commission or by the Indonesian Embassy, and sent 15 of those back to Indonesia on licence. We're very pleased that this has happened. We would have liked it to happen earlier when we first asked for it, but it's very pleasing that these 15 have gone back to Indonesia. And the government is no longer, in fact, using wrist x-rays to assess age. This is excellent, but the procedure should be removed from the Crimes Act as a procedure that can be relied on. OK, so additional steps need to be taken still. You believe your report outlines areas that the federal government still needs to act upon? We've made a number of recommendations in our report, and we certainly urge the government to give very serious considerations to them. Some of them are around wrist x-rays, some of them are around other forms of age determination, which we also have concerns about. We think the Migration Act, under which people are charged with people smuggling offences, should be amended so that the benefit of the doubt must be given to anyone who says they're a child unless it can be clearly established that they're not. And there are a number of other recommendations we hope will be looked at.
It's fair to say both sides of politics see a role for this nation's immigration policy to contain an element of a deterrent effect for asylum seekers and people smugglers. Have children essentially fallen foul of that approach?
Look, it's hard to know precisely what caused this problem. I think it likely that the public discourse, which is so antagonistic to people smuggling, the sense that as a nation we must be firm on people smuggling, might well have prevented people seeing things that they otherwise would have seen more clearly and more quickly. You know, it's hard to know, but I think it very likely.
Catherine Branson, as we mentioned earlier, your time as President of the Human Rights Commission is almost at an end. What's your assessment of this nation's record on human rights over the 5 years that you've held the position?
Look, I think Australia has generally a very good record on human rights. All of us are very lucky to live in this free, democratic country where rights are nearly always respected. Very few of us experience any problems with having our rights respected. But as this report has shown, and as our other experience has shown, there are pockets within Australia where people's rights aren't well respected, and it is critical as a nation that if we're serious about rights, we also respect the rights of the most vulnerable and the most marginalised in our society.
What's next for Catherine Branson as you leave your role?
Catherine Branson is thinking that she might perhaps take a little break and think about that. As you know, I work in Sydney, but my home's in Adelaide. This is not an easy thing for me, and it's not an easy thing for my family. My husband would like me to spend more time with him, and I think I should. I have ageing and frail parents. I should spend more time with them as well. So I'm going to take some time to reflect before I decide what next for me.
Okay, President of the Human Rights Commission, Catherine Branson, we wish you well, and thanks very much for coming in to talk to Afternoon Live.
Thank you very much, Nick.